Okay. Okay, here, let's take a look here. So it's saying how the Higgs boson was found. Okay, so this is actually a really unorthodox passage. It's talking about how it was found. I don't remember seeing any other passage like this. Let's take a look. It explains what the Higgs boson is, right? So what is this? This is a particle associated with the Higgs field. It's not telling me much. I don't know about the Higgs field either. It said experiments conducted tentatively. What does tentatively mean? What does tentative mean? As we talked about this like many times. More than 5 times. Unji, what does tentative mean? Could be, okay. But could be, but not exactly. It could be one of the meanings. It means it's not for sure, right? It could change. Like, if I'm making an appointment with you, I can, if I'm not entirely sure about the meeting time, I can say, hey, let's tentatively say tomorrow, but it might change, right? That's what it means when I say tentatively. So it tentatively confirmed the existence of the Higgs boson and thus of the Higgs field. Okay, so we do have experiments. Right? So, but these experiments were in 2012, okay? I don't know exactly when this guy found, quote unquote, found the Higgs boson, but let's take a look here. And nearly a half century ago, okay, so it's a long time ago, right? So, I mean, if you're pretty meticulous in your reading and you see this and you see this, you see that there is a gap, right? So he proposed that there was something called a Higgs boson, right? Nearly a half century ago. But the experiments confirmed it in 2012. Okay, so there is that gap. Okay, so let's take a look. Peter Higgs and a handful of other physicists were trying to understand okay, so this is what they were trying to understand. Mass, right? Right? So they just wanted to understand mass, right? You guys know what mass is, but let's see how the passage defines it. You can think of mass as an object's heft, or a little more precisely, as the resistance it offers to having its motion changed. Okay, you know, this is the definition of mass. So it's something that you traditionally know. So what is this doing right now? Your focus should be on this. Since the title is how the Higgs boson was found, you should be focusing on this. So even if you're reading this, your mind should be only half present. You don't care about this, okay? While you're reading this, okay, that's why you guys are slow. If you care so much about this, then you're not actually reading this, okay? Your mind should be only 50% on this, and the other half should be looking for this, right? That should be your focus, okay? So push on a freight train to increase its speed, and the resistance you feel reflects its mass. Okay, so still it's explaining mass. At a microscopic level, the freight train's mass comes from its constituent molecules and atoms, which are themselves built from fundamental particles, electrons and quarks. Okay, so these are the so electrons and quarks are the fundamental particles of molecules and atoms. You guys know what molecules and atoms are. But even if you're reading this, you're not trying to, I mean, you are like circling words and you might be defining terms and whatnot, but you should still be thinking about this. If you're carried away by this, you're gonna miss the central point of the passage. Right? Okay, electrons and quarks, but where do the masses of these and other fundamental particles come from? Okay, so this was their question, right? So So this, in retrospect, right? This whole bit, starting from line 4 to line 11, this is just explaining their question. It wanted to elaborate on their question, and in order for them to elaborate on the question, they needed us to understand this, right? So the point is this: the mass comes from the molecules and atoms. But where do the masses of the molecules and atoms come from? They come from this. But where do the masses of these come from? And that was their question, right? So that you should realize, right? So it's a really fundamental question that they're asking. Where do the masses of the very fundamental particles come from? That was their question, right? Okay, so this entire paragraph is dedicated to that question. It's not necessarily about explaining mass, although it does, but it's not its purpose, right? The purpose of this first paragraph is not just explaining mass, it's their question again, right? Okay, so let's go to the second paragraph. It says, when physicists in the 1960s, okay, so whenever you see years in a passage, you want to be careful, okay? So you just want to take a look at the entire passage, right? You just want to skim over the passage and see if you have any other years present. Because, you know, I've seen some passages before that do something like this. Like, they talk about the 60s. Like, in the 60s, something happened. In the 70s, something else happened. In the 80s, something else happened. In the 90s, something else happened. So if you don't, like in a passage like this, if you don't organize stuff, you're going to get lost. You're going to get confused, right? We need to kind of divide the passage up, and that's how you should perceive the passage. If you don't do that, when it's asking you, like, oh, what's the purpose of this word, for example? They're asking you for like a purpose of this phrase or whatever. They're asking this. And a lot of times, like I've seen you guys do this a lot. Like you see this, but you go back to a concept that's mentioned here, right? But you shouldn't be doing that. You should be only looking at this bit if it's asking for you, if it's asking a purpose for this bit, right? You should stay within this area. That means you guys aren't dividing the passage well enough, right? So you guys need to be able to distinguish between different bits in the passage, right? Okay, so we're going to do this, right? So in the 1960s, so physicists in the 1960s, or you can do this, right? You can box this entire bit. Physicists in the 1960s modeled the behavior of these particles. So what do these refer to, these particles? Electrons and quarks. Using equations rooted in quantum physics, they encountered a puzzle. Okay, so I love this. I love stuff like this. When you're reading a science passage, if scientists have questions, if they have puzzles, if they have a dilemma, if they have some kind of problem, yeah, those are the stuff that you need to focus on, right? So now your attention should go here, right? But still, at the back of your mind, you should be thinking about, okay, well, this passage is about how the Higgs boson, Hb, was found. So you should still be thinking about that. If you let go of that rope, you're going to slow down on the passage, right? Okay, so what's the puzzle? If they imagined that the particles were all, okay, so starting from here, it's going to describe the puzzle, right? If they imagined that the particles were all massless, right? So, it's a hypothetical scenario, right? So if they assumed that the particles did not have any mass, then each term in the equation clicked into a perfectly symmetric pattern like the tips of a perfect snowflake. Okay, so it's saying if they assumed the particles were massless, then it worked, right? It worked. Everything was perfect, right? And the symmetry was not just mathematically elegant, it explained patterns, right? Okay, so it was all good. It was all good. If we assume this, but I guess the problem was they did have mass, right? I mean, I know I've read the passage, but you can think about that when you're reading the passage also, right? Because they said they have a puzzle, right? And it shouldn't be perfect, right? There should be some kind of problem. And here's the problem, I guess. And here's the puzzle. Okay, like they make it pretty obvious here. They even tell you, okay, here's the puzzle. Physicists knew that the particles did have mass. So here's the problem, right? right, so anyway, so what I'm going to do, okay, so here's the first paragraph, right? The first paragraph was the question that scientists had. And what was this question? The question was, where does the mass of fundamental particles come from? So basically, it's this question, right? That's the first paragraph. But what about the second paragraph? It's about the puzzle, right? And what's the puzzle? So there's two scenarios. If we assume that it's massless, if we don't have any mass, if we assume that we don't have any mass, then it works, right? The equation works. But the thing is, we did have mass. Then what happens here? When they modified the equation to account for this fact, the mathematical harmony was spoiled. There you go. Okay, so it's spoiled. What's wrong with me? Okay, so these are the words that you should look for. I mean, you don't even need to triangle this, but you know that if it's massless, it worked. But if it actually did have mass, so in that case, it would be spoiled. It doesn't work. So that's the puzzle, right? The equations became complex and unwieldy, and were still inconsistent, right? This is elaborating on spoiled, right? Okay, so we have our puzzle, right? So let's take a look. What to do? Here's the idea put forward by Higgs. Okay, so I mean, this passage is pretty straightforward in the sense that they tell you exactly what they're talking about. So here's the idea put forward by Higgs, right? So let's find that out. So what's the solution? I guess Higgs offered some kind of potential solution, right? I don't know if this actually solved anything, but let's take a look. Don't shove the particles' masses. Okay, okay. So you need to notice that it's talking in a very informal language. Why do you need to know that? Because that's not going to be entirely like a precise. It's not a precise answer, right? The author wants you to just relate to the passage a little bit more and understand it better. That's why the author is using these kinds of informal language. But if I do have a more precise sentence, I want to take account of that, not the colloquial one. So don't shove the particles' masses down the throat of the beautiful equations. Okay, so don't use the mass, I guess. Instead, keep the equations pristine and symmetric, but consider them operating within a peculiar environment. Okay, so this is the idea itself, right? Peculiar environment. So this is the idea that he introduces in order to solve this puzzle. Imagine that all of space is uniformly filled with an invisible substance. So this is elaborating on the peculiar environment, right? That exerts a drag force on particles when they accelerate through it. This is all elaborating on a peculiar environment, this bit that comes after this, right? So that's called the Higgs field. And so you're familiar with this because we talked about this in the prologue. Higgs field, thus the Higgs boson, right? So the Higgs field, the environment itself exerts a force on the particles. So even if, I mean, you don't need to be able to visualize this. You don't need to visualize this. You just need to look at the words, right? So there was a puzzle, right? The puzzle was simply this, right? It works if we assume that there is no mass, but there is a mass for these particles, right? He actually introduced like a third element, like an environment that exerts force on the particles, and then push on a fundamental particle in an effort to increase its speed. And according to Higgs, you would feel this drag force as a resistance. Justifiably, you would interpret the resistance as the particle's mass. Okay, so that's what the particle is. That's what the mass is. The resistance that the field offers, the Higgs field, the environment offers the resistance, right? So that's the solution, right? So a peculiar environment, which is going to be the Higgs field, right? And this itself offers resistance, which is mass, right? For a mental toehold, think of a ping pong ball. Okay, so, it's pretty straightforward because, if you're not so familiar with physics, it would be a little bit difficult for you to understand. So it's giving you an analogy. So if you understood everything perfectly that comes before this, you don't really need to think about this analogy at all, right? But like, if you, like on the other hand, if you don't understand what this bit means, this analogy could potentially supplement your understanding. So if you didn't understand what the wording exactly, if you feel a little bit less confident about what happened before, you can take this analogy and use it to supplement your understanding. Think of a ping pong ball submerged in water. When you push on the ping pong ball, it will feel much more massive than it does outside of water. I mean, even if you guys never tried this, you would, if you just imagine this in your head, trying to put a ping pong ball in the water, it's gonna feel heavy. You're gonna feel resistance, right? So that's explaining the Higgs field, right? Its interaction with the watery environment has the effect of endowing it with mass. So with particles submerged in the Higgs field. So it's saying it's the same thing, ping pong ball analogy, right? So when we're explaining this, we talk about the ping pong ball, right? So let's take a look. The next paragraph, it says 1964, okay, 1964. So I see a lot of years, so I want to divide the passage by year. 1964, Higgs submitted a paper to a prominent physics journal. So this is really weird. This passage is really weird because it's talking about like history and stuff. I usually don't expect this, but I guess it is. It's talking about what actually happened. He submitted a paper in which he formulated this idea mathematically. The paper was rejected. Okay, so this is, I guess, something that you need to know. Very unique to this passage, right? Not because, so what is this? If I see a because, what is that? Come on, if I see a because, what is that? Okay, not because it contained a technical error, so it's not because it had an error. This is not the cause. But because, because, what is this? The premise of an invisible something permeating space, interacting with particles, blah, 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 it all just seemed like heaps of overwrought speculation. Okay, so this is the cause, right? This is why it was rejected, okay? The editors of the journal deemed it of no obvious relevance to physics. Okay, so why do we have this paragraph? Because they want to ask you about this cause and effect. That's why, okay? They're going to ask you about this. Like otherwise, they wouldn't have chosen this passage. Okay? They want to see if you can get this. Not because error, but because speculation, it was rejected. Okay? So you probably need to you probably need to rephrase technical error, or you need to rephrase speculation. That's going to be in the questions. Or I'm not talking about the purpose of the passage itself, but why did College Board pick this passage? Like, why would they leave this paragraph? They can edit paragraphs out because they felt like they could, ask you something about this. That's why they have it, right? Okay, so next paragraph. But Higgs persevered, and his revised paper appeared later that year in another journal. Okay, so we have a sequence of events. Initially, it was rejected, but he persevered, and physicists who took the time to study the proposal gradually realized. Okay, so when you're talking about a change, there's two kinds of changes. Something that has a clear transition point, just like a before and after, like plastic surgery, right? You have a before and after photo, right? Before and after. That's you have some kind of transition point when we're talking about plastic surgery. There's that kind of change, something that has a clear before and after. But another change is a change over time, right? Something that happens gradually. You can kind of graph it, you know. So those two kinds of changes, you need to be able to distinguish. But let's take a look. Proposal, they gradually realized that his idea was a stroke of genius, one that allowed them to have their cake and eat it too. What does this mean? Does anybody know what this means? Have their cake and eat it too. Have your cake and eat it too. Hyuna, do you know what this means? Have your cake and eat it too. Have one's cake and eat it too. Don't make any guesses. I don't want any guesses. If you don't know, say you don't know. That's what you do for idioms, right? Anybody know what this means? Okay, I mean, if you don't know, what are you going to do? Yeah, you're just going to read on, and then you're going to... It's really important. That's why you get questions wrong. If you don't know something, don't make a guess, especially for idioms, okay? Especially for idiomatic sayings, don't make a guess. So what this means actually, okay, I mean, it's not going to help, but I mean, it's a phrase used pretty often. Do you guys not watch Bid? Who watches Bid? What do you watch?
Big Bang Theory.
Okay. Unju, what do you watch? Huh? Game of Thrones? What? Huh? Gilmore Girls. Okay, so that's kind of opposite of Game of Thrones. But what do you watch?
On my blog.
Huh?
On my blog.
I can't hear you. What? Do I have bad ears?
On?
Yeah, yeah. What?
On my blog.
On my what?
Blog.
On my book?
No, blog.
Block?
Yeah. So like area.
On my block. What is that? Does anybody else know that? Okay, I mean they use it pretty often, and I've heard it multiple times, like even in shows. So this means in Korean it means 꽝 먹고 알 먹고, or 일거양득, or what is that? What's something similar to that? Was it one, like 돌 하나로 새 두 마리? What is that? Huh? Huh? Yeah, 일석이조, right? 일석이조, yeah. Yeah, 일석이조. Do you know what that means? Okay, so it's like you didn't, I mean, it doesn't matter, like your intentions don't matter, but actually, so you just used one stone, and you were trying to catch one bird, but you got two birds, right? So, I mean, have your cake and eat it too. I don't know exactly why, I mean, my guess is, you know, if you get a cake, you want to keep it, but you also want to eat it, right? But you can do both. That's what it's saying, right? So have your cake and eat it too, right? In Higgs' scheme, the fundamental equations can retain their pristine form because, okay, so this is the cause. The dirty work of providing the particles' masses is relegated to the environment, right? Okay, so you can keep the equations. So that's what it means. You can have the equations, but you can also have the masses. I mean, not have the mass, because the environment takes care of that element kicks in, right? So it works, right? It works, and they can also use their equations. So that's what it is, right? While I wasn't around to witness the initial rejection, what? So this is something really, really weird. Why? I mean, the author is talking in first person, right? In a science passage, okay? So let's take a look. While I wasn't around to witness the initial rejection of Higgs' proposal in 1964, I can attest that by the mid-1980s, okay, so here, right? Here we have another year. The assessment had changed. Okay, so I guess there was a before and after, right? So what was the before? I guess them not completely accepting that theory, right? The physics community had, for the most part, fully bought into the idea that there was a Higgs field, right? Okay, so this is the after factor, right? This is after the change, right? In fact, okay, so writing lesson, right? What comes after in fact? What kind of transition is in fact?
Elaboration.
Yeah, no. Well, no. Not an elaboration.
Clarification.
No. Emphasizing, right? It's emphasizing what came before it, right? So in a graduate course, I took this is like a story. This is like an anecdote, right? So you have this anecdote, but while you're reading this anecdote, you should think about why this is here. And this is why the reading section is not so different from the writing section. It says, it uses the word in fact, right? So why are we talking about this anecdote? It can potentially ask you about this. Why are we talking about this anecdote? Then you need to take a micro approach, right? It's here because the sentence before, right? It wants to emphasize that the physics community fully bought into the idea that there was a Higgs field, right? That's why it's here, the anecdote. Do not make your own assumptions. They have a transition word, right? So, okay, so let's take a look here. I took that cover, what? I took that, no. In a graduate course I took that covered what's known as the standard model of particle physics. Okay, so he took this course. Good for him. The professor presented the Higgs field with such certainty that for a long time I had no idea it had yet to be established experimentally. Okay, so if you start making your own guess, you can can tell your own stories. You can say something like, "Oh, okay, so this guy was stupid. That's the moral of the story, right?" No, wrong. Why did he mention this story? What does he want? What does he want to emphasize? Yeah. Well, okay, you can say the change, but just this idea. They bought into the idea. Everyone agreed. Everyone kind of it wasn't actually proved, but still they were like, yeah, it's a given that there is something called a Higgs field, right? Even though it wasn't established experimentally, right? And then it says, on occasion, that happens in physics. Okay, so what does that refer to?
Theories that isn't established experimentally.
No. No. Okay, so it's a combination, okay? It's a combination. It's not established experimentally, but people still believe it. That's that, okay? People believe it even if it's not established experimentally. How do you know that? You just need to know. I can't tell. I mean, I can't do anything about it. I mean, you can get a hint of it if you read the next bit. But what should ideally happen is you should know when you're reading the sentence, and the author wants you to know that he's talking about exactly that. That's the unspoken rule. Like he was elaborating on this idea. He was talking about this phenomenon, like this bit, and then he told this story, right? And then he says that, right? Okay, so it says mathematical equations can sometimes tell such a convincing tale, they can seemingly radiate reality so strongly that they become entrenched in the vernacular. What does entrenched mean?
Ingrained.
Yes, okay, thanks. The ingrained is very good, okay? So ingrained in the, what does vernacular mean?
Like a specific dialect used in a specific region or like a place.
Good. Or it can be technical terms used by, technical jargon used by specific people. Like you know, if you go into a room full of physicists, you're not necessarily going to understand what they're talking about because they're going to use a lot of vernacular that's pretty unfamiliar to you, right? Not familiar with you. Entrenched in the vernacular of working physicists, even before there's data to confirm them. Okay, so he kind of pins down the point for you again, in case you didn't understand, right? So this passage is kind of weird in the sense that at the very end, he kind of steps back, right? He kind of steps back and he talks about, you know, like he talked about one case study in the passage, right? He talks about the case of the Higgs boson, right? Not being established experimentally, but people still believe it. And then at the very end, he says, you know, that's something that sometimes happens in physics, right? Okay. So don't need to take a look at the graph, okay? Let's take a look at the questions. All right, so before we go to the questions, let's talk about this for a second. Okay, so we talked about the solution, right? So this paragraph was the solution, him offering the Higgs field. He's talking about a peculiar environment, and then he explains that idea. And then after that, it's talking about the history, right? It says it was talking about his idea being rejected. And why was it, this is the effect actually, right? Rejected. Why was it rejected? Because it felt like it was speculation, right? It wasn't proved, right? But what happened after that? You know, people gradually changed, right? Gradually changed because the idea allowed the equations to work, and it explained the phenomenon, right? And then after this, what happens? He talks about that anecdote. Why does he mention this anecdote? In order to say sometimes, even if it's not experimentally proven, people still accept it, right? And then after that, he steps back and he says, this happens sometimes in physics, in the field of physics, right? Okay, so let's go take a look at take a look at the shift focus question, okay? So, I don't expect you to write this down. Right now, yeah, you can write it down, but I'm not saying you should do something like this when you're reading the passage. Everything should be in your passage, right? You shouldn't like take separate notes or anything. I guess if you want, you can write next to the paragraph, right? Next to the paragraph, you can take like brief notes. You can write like a word or two. You can say, oh, this is the problem, this is a solution, or whatever. But you don't need to do this. This is just for you guys to see, right? Okay, so let's take a look. Main focus shifts from, okay, so let's take a look. A technical account of the Higgs field. Okay, so I'm not entirely sure about technical. That's the first thing that I'm not so happy about. Why? Because we're talking about ping pong balls and stuff. Would that be technical? And okay, so you should be like, okay, I'm not so sure about technical, but I'll let this go since we did talk about the Higgs field. To a description of it aimed at a broad audience. Well, we never talked about its audience. And nonetheless, even less so for broad. I don't know. Review of Higgs work. Okay. I mean, I guess what a review could be is pretty broad. So you can probably let this go. I don't know. Okay. So you want to be a little bit more forgiving. Okay. So because you could potentially get stuff wrong if you look at it in such a narrow-minded way. So, okay, you'll let this go because we did talk about Higgs work to a contextualization of that work within Higgs's era. Okay. Do you know anything about Higgs's era? That's the thing. Okay, some of you might be confused with this because, okay, what does contextualization mean? We talked about this, right? It means to put it in context, right? What does that mean? Put something into context. So you're talking about something, some phenomenon, I guess. And then you say, well, you know, this is actually part of this, and you talk about the big picture, right? That's what contextualization is. You talk about the big picture. The example that I talked about was Korean history, right? Did we talk about this? I don't think we did. Okay, so, I mean, actually, I'm pretty sure I did. So, say for example, like, you talk about the Korean War. Like just all of a sudden, if you're talking about the Korean War without talking about world affairs, it's pretty hard to explain. Like why would North Korea all of a sudden like invade South Korea? You know what I mean? Like you need to contextualize that. You need to think about that in terms of world politics. What was happening during that time? You need to think about that in terms of the Cold War. So without the Cold War, it's really hard to think about the Korean War, right? You need to think about the context. That's what. When you're talking about the Korean War, you need to contextualize that in terms of the world politics happening during that time, in terms of the Cold War, right? So what does this mean? You're talking about Higgs's work, but you also talk about Higgs's era and say, oh, you know, during this era, this and this was happening. Do we know anything? Do we know anything about that? No, we don't, right? C, an explanation of the Higgs field. Okay, this is actually a lot better than a technical account, right? Because he did explain it, right? I mean, and in very simple terms, I would rather say, you know, like using those analogies and stuff. So this is okay. To a discussion of the response. Did we see a response to Higgs's theory? What was the response?
Rejection.
Yeah, rejection, but gradually they accepted. So this is okay. Right? So this is likely to be an answer. You can't deny anything here. The analysis of the Higgs field, like, okay, so, you know, analysis could be used pretty broadly, so just let this go. To a suggestion of future, no, of course not. We never talked about any potential future discoveries. Why do we talk about the ping pong ball? Because he's worried that we're stupid, right? He wants to explain it better, so here, right? Clarify an abstract concept. So mostly in a science passage, when you use an analogy, it's to explain to a broad audience because people might be confused, right? They don't necessarily understand stuff in abstract terms and stuff like that, right? So 44, most strongly suggests. Okay, so most strongly suggests, so you should note that you can make a little bit of a jump, little bit of a logical jump. So it potentially isn't just rephrasing, right? Okay, so that the reason, the reason the scientific community initially rejected Higgs era, okay, so what is this? Speculation, right? So just rephrase speculation, but you can make a little bit of a jump, right? You can make a little bit of a jump, but your base should still be speculation. So speculation. Address a problem. No, that's not what speculation means. Worked only if, no. Speculation. Rendered accepted theories in physics obsolete. Obsolete means old, right? Outdated. Did you guys ever use iPods before? iPods? You guys used iPods? Really? iPod, what iPod?
That little box thingy.
Everything's a little box thingy.
No, but the big ones are like rectangular shape. It's like
That still qualifies as a box. What, iPod Nano or iPod Mini?
I think it was mini.
Okay. Who else used an iPod? What did you use? Mini? Huh. You guys are old. Okay. But those are outdated, right? No one needs an iPod nowadays. I mean, I guess if you're like a hipster, I guess you could use it. But I mean, everybody would. I mean, iPhones rendered iPods obsolete, right? You can just put music in your phone and just listen to that, right? It's not talking about that. Appear to have little empirical basis. Okay, so here's the jump. Yeah, you can make this jump, right? So it's because it's a guess, it didn't have empirical basis. What's empirical? We talked about this. This is actually a very important word, right? Empirical means something that you can quantify or something really tangible, something you can observe, right? That's what empirical means. But if it's a guess, yeah. So there you go. And you just need to choose the line reference for this. So I guess here, right? Speculation. You don't even need to go back. You see this word and you just know it. You should remember that cause and effect very clearly. Okay, the author notes that one reason Higgs's theory gained acceptance was that, okay, so it's also talking about a reason, but I don't remember using a cause and effect for this. In this case, the cause and effect might not be so overt, right? It might be a little bit subtle, right? But, notice that if I say this, A increases B, can this be a cause and effect? Yes. So even if you don't see like explicit trigger words, things could still be cause and effects, right? Because this can be written like this, right? A causes the increase of B, right? You know what I mean? So sometimes cause and effects, even if it's not explicit, it could be there, right? So in that case, what would you do? You would grab this idea and then you would look for this in the passage, right? So you would physically locate, okay, where's the talk about him gaining acceptance, his theory gaining acceptance? Do I have a line reference? Yes, I do, right? So where would I need to go? Well, I need to at least, I need to at least it needs to at least be after line 54. Why? Because this paragraph was about him being rejected, right? And then later on it gained acceptance. So I need to look after this, right? So I'm gonna eliminate any line reference that's before 54, right? So I'm not going to look at these two answer choices, right? So I'm just gonna look here first, 55 to 63. Okay, so let's take a look at 55 to 63. Yeah, it's this entire paragraph, right? So within this paragraph, I need to look for gained acceptance. And here it is, right? Gradually realized that his idea was a stroke of genius, one that allowed them to have their cake and eat it too, and then he explains it, right? So they can keep their equations, and still it can account for the mass, right? So yeah, that could potentially be it. But if you want to be sure, you can also look at the next line reference. So 78 to 83. But this is not, I mean, okay, let's take a look. 78 to 83. I mean, no. I mean, we're done talking about the Higgs boson here, right? It's not talking about it gaining acceptance or whatever. This is talking about a phenomenon that happens pretty often in physics. So it's most likely going to be C. So if our answer is going to be C, then we need to go off of that idea, right? Have your cake and eat it too. You can keep your equations, but still it accounts for the mass, right? Okay, so you can keep the equation, but still you can account for the mass, right? So I want to look for answers that do this. Let scientists accept two conditions that have previously seemed irreconcilable. Yeah, this is possible, right? Because this. So it's okay. Introduced an innovative approach. Okay, well, okay, that could be applied to, no, we don't know anything about its applications. We only know this. Answered a question, okay, that earlier scientists had not even, they did raise this a lot, right? So no. The explained why two distinct phenomena were being misinterpreted as one phenomenon. No, they weren't conflating. This is them saying, oh, they were conflating. They were saying, okay, they were looking at two different things and they're saying, oh, it's the same thing, right? I look at Woojin and look at Hyunwoo and like, same person, right? That's conflating, or you know what I mean? So I mean, it's not that, right? So it's A. Technique, main points of the last paragraph. Okay, so the last paragraph starts off with this anecdote, right? Okay, so it's probably going to be talking about that. I'm pretty sure, right? Because it's very unorthodox. We never seen that. You can kind of guess that, and you should have sensed that. Why is a science passage talking in the first person? I mean, it's not okay. So sometimes we've read some science passages that uses the word we, right? But we postulate, we speculate, blah blah blah. But those are scientists trying to explain something, them coming up with the hypothesis, something like that. But this passage, it's not coming up with any ideas. It's just explaining the history of something and how it happened, but all of a sudden it's talking in the first person. So why did they use that? So it's probably asking for that thing we talked about when we were reading the last paragraph. Recounts a personal experience. Yes, he does. How are you going to deny this, right? I'm just going to leave this. It describes his own education. This is wrong, right? I mean, okay, if you're confused, let it go, okay? If you're confused, let it go. Okay, I'll look at the next part after this. He provides autobiographical details. Okay, so I mean, it's technically wrong, but you could still let this go if you're confused. Just look at the second part if you're confused. I'm saying, like, some people, like, in a two-part answer, when you're looking at two-part answer choices, some people actually get rid of the right answer choice because they're being too narrow-minded. So if that's one of your issues, let it go, okay? Just let it go. Look at the second part later. He contrasts the status of, no, so this one, I know for sure it's not the answer. So for this one, okay, personal experience to illustrate a characteristic of the discipline of physics. He does this, right? Yeah, at the very end, he said, on occasion, that happens in physics, right? So this one, pretty good. Describes his own education to show how physics has changed during his career. No, it's not during his career. You know what I mean? It was from the 1960s till he was in school. Nothing changed while he was in school. He didn't talk about that kind of change. Details to demonstrate how Higgs' theory was confirmed. Never confirmed, right? So, A. Established. Okay, so let's take a look. Line 77, established. So what is this? Higgs field. Higgs field had yet to be established experimentally. Okay, so Higgs's theory, or Higgs field, was established experimentally. If you're confused, you can write this down right next to it, and you can try replacing words here. Okay, so what would that look like? The Higgs field was validated experimentally. That sounds okay. Founded. No, I mean, you found a club, you found an institution, stuff like that. You don't found something experimentally. That doesn't make any sense. So B is gone. Introduced. Was introduced experimentally. I guess it fits, but the meaning is very far off, right? It fits, but the meaning is off. This one completely, right? Enacted. You don't enact like a theory or whatever, right? So it should be A. here. What purpose does the graph serve in relation to the passage as a whole? Okay, so let's look at the graph. Okay, so immediately when I see the graph, the thing I'm looking for is the Higgs boson, of course, right? You shouldn't be looking at other things. Okay, so I mean, just read it at least though. Years from introduction of concept of particle to experimentally till experimental confirmation, right? So it's saying the idea of an electron, the existence of the electron was introduced 1880, but it was confirmed like little bit over 10 years after, right? Same like photon, blah, blah, blah. So we have a lot of different things. What about the Higgs boson? So it was introduced here. Okay, so it's kind of long. It's longer than others, right? That's what sticks out to me. And it's still not experimentally confirmed if you look at the graph, right? Actually, well, it's experimentally confirmed in 2012. That's actually said in the prologue, right? So I guess it's either still not experimentally proven, I mean, but they said it, right? So it's experimentally proven here, I guess. Okay, so let's take a look. So what does the graph do? So, I mean, okay, so it talks about other particles also, and you know, you might not have known about this. The fact that the particles, the idea of a particle being introduced and it taking like more than 10 years until it's experimentally confirmed. But it happens a lot, right? He said that at the very end too, right? On occasion that happened, but well, you know, anyway, let's take a look. A, it indicates that the scientific community's quick acceptance of the Higgs boson was typical. How in the world would you know about this just looking at the graph, right? Maybe so when it comes to the electron, maybe people didn't believe it right up till the point it was experimentally confirmed. You don't know anything about gaining acceptance just based on this graph. You can't say anything. So A is gone. B says it places the discussion of the reception of the Higgs boson into a broader scientific context. Yeah, it does. It is a broader scientific context because we're talking about other particles. So you can't deny this. B should be okay. I want to take a look at other ones. See, it demonstrates that the Higgs boson was regarded differently than were other hypothetical particles. No, it was treated pretty in a similar way. I guess you can say, no, but it was longer, but it wasn't treated differently. How can you say it was regarded differently? Yeah, it just took a longer time till it was experimentally confirmed, but can you say people thought about it differently just based on that? The only two things that you know is when it was introduced and when it was confirmed. How do you know it was regarded differently? So this one kind of raises a flag. What about D? Clarifies the ways in which the Higgs boson represented a major. How do you know that? We just know the years, right? We just know the years of the introduction of the concept till the experimental confirmation. So I don't know anything about this. So B should be the right answer here. 51, best supported by the data presented in the graph. Okay, well, let's just take a look at the graph, right? So the W boson and the Z boson were proposed and experimentally confirmed at about the same time. Okay, so let's just go back and confirm this. Let's take a look. W and Z. W here, Z here. Okay, conveniently they're together. Yes, there we go. A is the right answer. You can just pick that and move on. How in the world are you going to deny this? If you're even unsure of this, I don't know what to tell you. You should be pretty sure about this answer choice, right? I mean, yeah. So 52, based on the graph, the author's depiction of Higgs theory in the mid-1980s is most analogous to which hypothetical situation? Okay, so if you have trouble, I mean, if you get questions wrong in this on this passage, it's probably this question. Like some people, like if you get a question wrong. Okay, so we need to look at the graph, but we also need to look at the passage. So this is graph plus passage, right? So first thing that we need to know, what did the author say about the Higgs boson in the mid-1980s? That's something that you can refer back to the passage on, right? So refer back to the passage, and what does it say about the mid-1980s? So we boxed all the years, right? What does it say? mid 1980s? Accepted, right? Was it experimentally confirmed? No. Okay, so that's what it is, right? So it was accepted. What else? Not experimentally confirmed. Right? So it needs to satisfy these two conditions, right? So let's take a look. M neutrino was widely disputed. No, gone, because it needs to be accepted, right? Few physicists doubted. Okay, few physicists doubted means not a lot of people doubted, right? So this one is okay. It satisfies number one, that most people accepted it. No physicists prior to 1960 considered a possibility. Well, no, I need accepted, right? What about D? Most physicists believed in the existence. There we go. So now I'm just going to look at these two answer choices, and what do I need to look at? Whether it was not experimentally confirmed. So if it is experimentally confirmed, that's not the answer, right? So take a look at 2012 and tau neutrino. Is it experimentally confirmed?
Oh, yeah.
Huh? Yes? It is? Okay, then it's not the answer, right? So then it's D. Okay, any questions on this passage? Okay, so this is a pretty unorthodox passage. I mean, it's a really one-of-a-kind science passage. But it's, I mean, it shouldn't be hard, this passage. Okay, let's take a quick break then, and then we'll come back and do the writing section. So if you come back early from the break, just take a look at the writing section. Think about what questions you're going to be asking. Okay. at 12?
30 and 40.
Huh?
13 and 30.
13 and what?
13.
30 and what?
30.
Huh?
35.
Do I have bad ears? Really?
Yes.
Yes?
Probably.
You can hear him okay?
Yeah.
It sounds really muffled because of your masks. I know. This is shocking news.
17 and 41.
41? Okay, this time I got it.
37.
Oh, so everybody got wrecked here. 14. So are you guys writing down how many you got wrong for each problem set on the first page? Yeah, so why don't you guys go to the table of contents for a second then? Okay, so for problem set 11, how many did you get wrong? Okay, close your eyes for a second. 0. For problem set 11, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Okay, good. Okay, just to get a sense. This is it? This is everything? Really? Are you guys sure? So everybody should get at least, should get less than 8 wrong. Is that what happened? If you get more than 8 wrong, you're doing something wrong. Really? Honestly?
42. Number 9 and
4, 8, 11. So everybody got less than 11. And these are the only questions you're allowed to get wrong now. If you weren't 100% on the question, you should mark it. You should put a star next to it. Okay? Let's take a look. 9. Sentence 1. Okay. So number 9, why don't you guys close your eyes? Okay. You guys know what you picked for number 9? Who chose A, B, C, D? Okay, open your eyes. Yeah, a lot of you got it wrong. Actually, like a lot of you got it wrong. You can't do this. Like if you're unsure, if you're not sure of it, you need to recognize that. Okay? You need to be able to recognize that there's a possibility that you got this wrong. Okay? What should you do? What's the first thing that you need to do? Sentence order. Yeah. Yeah, well, first of all, I'm not gonna read this sentence. That's the first thing that you should do. If you started off reading the sentence, you're screwed. Okay? Don't do that. Don't read the sentence. Okay? Do not read the sentence. Just read starting from sentence 2. Okay, so let's take a look. More than 60% of the contribution coming from commercial goods and services created by companies using what? Wait, more than 60% of the contribution. Oh, okay, we need to kind of solve 8 first. I guess we need to change this into a verb, right? So more than 60% of the contribution came from. So that should be the answer for number 8, right? You need to actually think about this then. What's the contribution? What's the contribution? Let's go to the previous paragraph in order to check that. NASA also sponsors blah, blah, blah. They sponsors them, but okay, well, you can't use the contribution then. I mean, they sponsor them, but that you can't compress that into saying that's a contribution. You know what I'm saying? Because we're talking about numbers here, right? If you're sponsoring someone, you can't put a percentage on something. They just sponsor them, right? So it should be A, just right away. You know what I mean? Because I don't know what this is. Then what if I put sentence 1 here? A report by the Space Foundation estimated that NASA contributed. There you go. Contribution, right here, right? So it's A. This one, considering adding the following sentence. Okay, so it's at the very beginning of the paragraph. So I know it's not going to be detail. That's the first thing I know. If it can go in here, what should it be? It should either introduce the information that's about to follow, or it needs to kind of be a summary of all the information here, right? So those are my options if I want to put it in the very beginning of the paragraph, right? So let's just read this paragraph first. With world population topping 7 billion, humanity is in need of some perspective, right? Whenever you say need, that's what's important, right? So we need this. Therefore, we should continue to support NASA. Okay, good. Prescription, right? We should continue to support NASA. This is what he wants to say. Not only for practical reasons, but also because it is a necessary vehicle for increasing our awareness, right? So he's saying we need to support NASA because it's going to increase our awareness, right? Blah, blah, blah. What about the next part? Well, I didn't include that. Well, anyway, why don't we take a look at number 10 then? In addition, what? In addition, so I need to go back, I guess. But anyway, let's take a look. NASA has facilities. Okay, so no, it's completely irrelevant. Why are we talking about facilities? We're saying we need to support NASA. But why start a sentence giving us like a trivial detail? That's way too off. So I need to go with C or D. I don't want this. Does it undermine the passage's claim? No. Undermine means it harms it. I mean, it doesn't necessarily harm it. It's not going against what this is saying. Just because they have facilities doesn't mean we shouldn't continue supporting NASA or something like that. So it blurs the paragraph. Yeah, it's irrelevant. So that's why it's D. 14. Okay, so this is a transition question. Practice of continued education, also aka professional development, benefits not only employees but also employers. Okay, so it benefits these people, right? So continued education benefits them and them, right? Okay, next next sentence. Meaningful professional development is a shared responsibility. Yeah. Okay, so let's take a look. Continued education benefits employees and employers, right? And then it says, so it's a shared responsibility. Okay, can it be a continuation? Possibly. Can it be a contrast? No, of course it's not a contrast. You can get rid of contrast words, right? So I can get rid of B and C. Is it a cause and effect? They benefit, so it's a shared responsibility. They benefit both, so it's a shared responsibility. That's actually pretty good, right? Because it benefits both parties, it's a shared responsibility. So cause and effect sounds pretty good, but what about similarly? I mean, it's not a similar idea. They're not on the same plane. You know what I mean? I mean, they're somehow related to each other. It's not like if you say similarly, you need to have like a parallel idea, right? I like chocolate, and similarly, she also likes chocolate. Something like that, right? But it's not like that parallel idea. So I should go with cause and effect here. So accordingly. Okay, well, what kind of question is this? What kind of question is 17? Wait, where's the underline portion?
From show to
Okay, so A says, wait, let's actually read from here. Then it's the duty of those employees to identify and even pay for appropriate resources to, okay, so employees need to identify and they need to pay for the resources in order to do this, I guess, right? Blah, blah, blah. So A says, show them how and why they are falling behind and what they should do about it. Right? It sounds like an elementary school student wrote this. I mean, there are nouns for this, right? Why they are falling behind, you can probably turn this into some kind of noun. What they should do about it, you can probably turn this into another noun, right? So I'm not entirely sure about A. B says address their deficiencies. Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what A is trying to say. Address, if you're dealing with your deficiencies, this is what you're doing. So this is okay. Deal with their flaws and shortcomings. Redundant, right? Allow them to meet their employer's needs in terms of the knowledge they are supposed. What? Okay, all right. So these are just way too wordy. Right? Okay, so this is, I guess, one of the rare instances that they're actually asking for you to kind of make it concise. And I mean, this is pretty concise. Like, and you don't want to use this kind of language. Why they're falling behind and what they should do about it. Sounds very elementary if you do this. So it should be B here. So everyone got everything right on the third passage, I guess. No, not exactly. 30. We didn't do 30. Okay, well, what kind of question is this? I think it's pretty similar to the one that we just did. Because, okay, grammatically, I don't think there can be anything wrong here. Because, I mean, we don't have commas. We don't have any, like, relative clauses versus actual clauses. We don't have semicolons, stuff like that. Okay, so let's take a look. What? 30. Spending. Is it this? Okay. During the early years, the movement also focused on the value of spending lots of time with friends and family. You know what I mean? I mean, okay, spending lots of time with friends and family. You can say it's leisurely meals. Okay, that sounds better. Okay, so if I were to choose A, I would rather go with B. So far, right? So this one sounds okay. Eating slowly and in the company of loved ones, such as friends. Isn't this redundant also? I mean, doesn't, okay. I mean, that and eating slowly, leisurely meals, making it a proper noun sounds a little bit better here. Joining friends as well as family for time-consuming. Okay, so this one has a little bit of a negative connotation. So I'm not sure about this one. So it would be B here. Okay, so this one should be a very easy question. Why? What kind of question is this? Well, it's a one-of-a-kind question. Do you ever get a question that has this exact question stem? No. The writer wants to add supporting detail to indicate that, okay, so I know it's supporting detail, but that's not the question. The question is, you want to have a supporting detail to indicate that the story was widely reported. So you just need to say this, right? So a detail point for the fact that the story was widely reported. Okay, so just look for this, widely reported. Okay, what's the underlined portion? What's the underlined portion? Is it this entire sentence? Okay, so let's take a look at A. The Times article claimed that people had fled. No, it's not. Okay, it's not widely reported. I need to get widely reported, right? But I mean, this is talking about the content itself. So I don't know. B, other newspapers also ran stories. Okay, so yeah, it was widely reported then. Other newspapers also ran stories. So that's the definition of widely reported. Others also reported it. In 2013, many newspapers, okay, sounds good so far, featured articles about the 75th anniversary of the broadcast. No. Because we need to, well, that's missing the story. The story was that, you know, the broadcast, Orson Welles' broadcast incited mass hysteria. That's the story. It's not their anniversary. So not this one. Times was then and is now, no, right? Why are we talking about the popularity of the Times, right? So, so B should be the right answer. Okay, so this is actually an idiomatic saying. Go so far as to verb. Go so far as to verb, right? What does this mean? Go so far as to do something. Why did I erase this? Go so far as to do something. So if you go so far as to do something, it's like, well, okay, talk about an example, I guess. Okay, so let's say I told my friend, oh, I hate this person. I hate this guy named Jason. I hate this Jason guy. And then my friend says, well, do you want to kill him? And I say, well, I wouldn't go so far as to kill him, but I just don't like him. You get it? I don't know how else to explain this. Why do I always use killing in my examples? But do you get the idea? Do you guys get the idea? Go so far as to, so you went the distance and you did something, like just for that kind of thing. So go so far as to, so it should it should be A, right? I mean, no, wait, go, no, this is, wait, what? No, this one doesn't have an as, right? Go so far as, is this underlined? Yeah, so go so far as to, so it should be D. Wait, next one was 39, right? Okay, combine. So, is there an underlined portion here? Which one's underlined?
From profits to portraying.
Profits to portraying. Okay. All right, so let's, where does the sentence start? Here? Okay. At this time, JP and MS, both professors of communication studies, argue that, okay, so they argued that, okay, so let's pretend like the sentence starts here. The newspaper industry sought to discredit the newly emerging technology of radio. Okay, so newspaper industry wanted to discredit radio, right? Which was cutting into newspapers' profits, right? Okay, so they had an agenda, right? They saw them as their competitor, right? And they wanted to hurt them, right? That's the idea here. And then the second part, the newspaper industry tried to do this, right? I mean, okay, so this is really redundant. I'm not saying it's wrong, but they mentioned that whole idea again, right? The newspaper industry tried to do this by portraying the new medium as irresponsible. So it sounds like this whole thing is whatever is mentioned in the sentence before. Okay, well, with that in mind, let's take a look. Profits, which is what the newspaper industry tried to do when it portrayed. All right, so I mean, this one is way too wordy. Like in cases like these, what you want to do, okay, so okay, there's two kinds of combined sentence questions, if you noticed. There's really long ones that just give you two sentences and just say you figure it out, and these ones that kind of ask for that transition point in the middle. An easy thing that you can do is, for these ones, the shorter ones are better, right? I mean, as given that they're grammatically correct. So what you want to check for is you want to check the short answers first. And if they're grammatically sound and they get the meaning across without any contamination, it should be the answer. So I want to check for this one first, okay? So they try to discredit the emerging technology of radio by portraying. Okay, so this one has a comma here. What would this comma do? It would make this bit into a relative clause, and then by portraying, right? So this is essentially saying, hey, why don't we pretend like this thing doesn't exist, right? That works, right? Radio, by portraying the new medium as irresponsible. So it's okay, okay? So D is the right answer. Establishing main idea. So is this the underlined portion? Okay. Let's take a look. So we need to look at the entire paragraph, I guess, right? So proof of ulterior motives is scarce. This one is not underlined, right? Okay. So we don't have much proof of ulterior motives. And it says, for instance, the C. Hooper ratings indicated that a mere 2% of households had tuned into the broadcast. So, this word means that 2% was not a lot, right? I mean, we need to get a sense of the numbers, right? So we know that this was not a lot. So not a lot of people watched it, and it says PNS also call into question the validity of an off-cited report. So they question a report. What does the report say? That was based on a survey conducted 6 weeks after the broadcast, right? So they just say, hey, this report, it might be wrong. And then it says, I don't want to read this, right? Because it's in the question. According to this report, 1 million people indicated that they had been frightened by the broadcast, right? Ratings, however, revealed that far fewer than 1 million people had been, so it's kind of like attacking a notion, right? So it's saying, a lot of people weren't actually, it wasn't like the mass hysteria that reports suggested. It was actually pretty toned down. People overreacted. It's kind of blown out of proportion, right? That's what it's suggesting, this paragraph, right? So A says, consequently weakening PNS's argument, weakening PNS's argument, but, well, no, it's actually PNS, they're the ones reasoning against the reports, right? So it shouldn't be A, but evidence does suggest that reports of panic had been overblown. So it's saying it's exaggerated, right? And they kind of give us the evidence that it was exaggerated. So this one is okay. PNS maintained that the newspaper intentionally distorted. We don't have anything about intentionally doing this, right? Making it difficult to determine what really happened. Well, that's not the subject. That's not the subject of this. It's saying, it's exaggerated. It's only 2% watched it, and the report, it's not even valid, and they were wrong, that kind of thing. So B, it should be the right answer here. And then in 42. Okay, 42. Who chose A for 42? B? C? D? Really? What did you choose? What did you choose? Huh? Okay. Okay, fine. Did someone say 44? Okay, 44. Close your eyes. Who chose A? B? C? D? Okay, again, someone didn't raise their hands. Okay, show me your hands so I can see it. So A, 44. A. Who chose A? B? C? D? Okay, let's take a look. Okay, a lot of people got it wrong. Okay, getting the questions wrong is fine, but you should know, you should be able to identify your potential to get it wrong. So you should have marked it if you got it wrong. If you didn't mark it, if you were 100% sure and you got it wrong, you're in trouble. You're not going to fix that. You're not going to be able to fix your mistakes. You should be able to recognize that at least there's a possibility of you getting it wrong. Okay, so I don't even need, okay, so for this question, let's think about it. All right, so they're asking us a question. They're asking us a question, but let's use some common sense, okay? So A says not unlike, right? B says unlike, not like, different from, all right? And obviously it's talking about, like the question is asking you about the meaning. It's not about tone, it's not about usage, right? It's about meaning. Do you know what I'm saying? It's not saying, oh, which one sounds the best. It's not asking you that, right? It's not asking you about any tone, anything colloquial. It's not talking about what's an idiomatic usage of this, like what's the proper usage. No, it's saying effectively signals the comparison, right? So obviously it's talking about meaning, right? So let's think in terms of meaning then, okay? Can you tell me the difference between unlike and not like and different from? No, they're all the same. So it should be A. Do you know what I'm saying? This question is obviously not asking about any kind of usage. It's asking you about the meaning. You need to take a look at the passage, right? What does not unlike mean? Well, it means it's not unlike, right? When do we use not unlike? Okay, so this is used pretty often, okay? Not unlike. If you say you use it when you're comparing two things, but it's a little bit too much if you say the two things are like each other, right? You see some similarities, but it would be a stretch to say that the two things are similar, right? But you still want to point out the fact that there are some common denominators there. There's some commonalities. Then you say, okay, they're not unlike. Like, say for example, apples and oranges are not unlike in that both of them are fruits, right? But you know what I'm saying, right? Okay, so A should be the answer. Okay, are you guys sure we don't need to go over more questions? I can see you guys getting destroyed already.
Number 24.
24. What kind of question is this? Okay, sentence structure. So what do you need to do in a sentence structure question?
Identify the subject, verb, and object.
No, wrong. Yes, subject, verb, conjunction. Okay. Probably told you guys this more than 10 times now. So if you didn't mark the subject, verb, and conjunction, shame on you. What are you doing? Do it. Okay? If you don't do it, you will get a question wrong eventually. Eventually, you'll get it wrong, and that's going to cost you 30 points on the test, eventually. We talked about this before, right? Like on some of the Asian tests in Asia, if you get one wrong on the writing section, it was 30 points. That's you getting rejected by your dream school. 30 points. That'll cost you a school. Okay? I mean, just do it. Just do it. If it's a sentence structure question, just mark the subject, verb. I don't care about the object. Why do you care about the object? It's obviously, I mean, obviously you're looking at the sentence structures like this, right? These are the things that you're looking for, right? So let's take a look. To counter the rise of fast food and fast life, right? Okay. Well, okay, do we have a subject so far? No. This whole thing is just a modifier or a prepositional phrase in the very beginning, right? A cohort of chefs. Okay, so here's the subject, right? This whole thing is the subject, actually. Spearheaded. There you go. And then we have a back modifier. You don't need to necessarily mark this. You're only looking for conjunctions. Okay, so this is a very simple thing. Okay, so what do you need here? Well, first of all, if I say A, it's okay, right? Because it would make this into like a front modifier or something like that. So a front modifier or just a modifier or prepositional phrase at the very beginning. So this one is okay. What about B? No, you're wrong. Why is B wrong? Why knowing why the answer choices are wrong is also important. Why is B wrong? Why is B wrong? Unzi, why is B wrong?
Because the first part of the sentence, to counter the rise of fast food and fast life, it's not necessarily a sentence.
Yes, you need a subject and a verb before a semicolon. That's the right answer. You need a subject and a verb before a semicolon, but it's not there, so it's wrong. What about C? Why is C wrong? Why is C wrong? Why is C wrong?
It doesn't elaborate or anything.
No. Wrong. So Anna, why is C wrong?
The same reason as
I didn't hear anything. Well, I guess my ears are really bad. What?
there's need to be a sentence before.
Yes, there needs to be it's the same thing. You need a sentence before a semicolon, and you need a sentence before this. Unless of course you're using a list, right? In which case you could use a semicolon, right? For complicated lists. But what about this? Oh, same sentence. You need a sentence before a period. You don't have that. So that's why A is the right answer. Okay, any other questions? Okay. Just a second. This was set 12. Okay, why don't you guys mark it right now? Don't circle the right answers. That's hurting you. Don't circle the right answers. Just say it's wrong if it's wrong. You're just telling yourself you don't want to try again. Okay, so count how many you got wrong. Okay. Done counting? Who's not done counting? Okay. Why don't you guys close your eyes? Who got all the questions right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Okay, good. Yeah, so so if you got questions wrong that you did not ask, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. You can't fix that. You literally can't fix that. It's a disease. It's you can't do it. You should at least recognize that you made a mistake. I mean, what you should be thinking about when you're solving the question is you recognizing the potential to get it wrong. You should be able to recognize that. If you can't recognize that, you can't improve your score. If you're just saying, oh, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is the answer, I'll bet my life on it, and you get it wrong, no. Okay, so again, let's go over some questions. Okay, so the ones that you got wrong, okay? Start from the top. First passage. Yeah. 11. Just take a look at these two sentences. Okay, so world population, this is not important. Humanity is in need of some perspective. So it's saying, yeah, we need this, right? We need some perspective. And then it says, we should continue to support NASA, not only for practical reasons, but also because it's our awareness, right? So we need this, okay? So, I mean, just, if you got it wrong, make sure you circle the key phrases. If you didn't circle the key phrases, you won't improve. You'll just like you're stuck. Like, why are you not doing it if you didn't circle the key phrases? Okay, so you need to circle the key phrases. Okay. Okay. So what's the relationship between these two? Okay, well, first of all, just ask yourself, is this a continuation? Need of some perspective, and we should support NASA. Well, do you think those two are parallel ideas? No. I mean, it could be, but I don't think it's the best. If we say it's a cause and effect, we need this, so we should continue to support NASA. I mean, that makes a lot more sense. And of course, it's not a contrast, so I'm going to get rid of the contrasts. You should be able to easily spot that, right? Okay, so we have for example and then therefore. Okay, so if we say for, so just try it, okay? So for example is something like this. You have a general point and then you have a sentence just saying, okay, this is an example of that, right? Is this an example of us needing some perspective? We should continue to support NASA. Is that an example of us needing some perspective? No, it should be the result. We need some perspective. That's why we should continue to support NASA. So it's A. Okay. Okay. And anything else on the first passage? Okay. Second passage then. 15. Okay, let's take a look at 15 first, then 16. All right, so where's the underline portion? Okay, so If you got this wrong, you didn't answer the question. That's why you got it wrong. You need to answer the question, okay? Like, okay, I'm telling you, like, especially people who have a higher score, they make this mistake. You don't answer the question. You need to answer the question, okay? Okay, so like, what happens is this. You just go with your own idea of what the passage should be. But there's always going to be two relevant ideas for the harder questions. Like two ideas, yeah, of course, they're going to be irrelevant. But these two ideas, they can be relevant. But if you don't read the question, you're going to be dictated by what your expectation of the passage should be. And that's where the inconsistency comes in. And of course, you will get it wrong sometimes. So you need to answer the question. Establishes the argument that follows. So what is the argument that follows? So we need to take a look at that. If employees find themselves falling behind in the workplace, these critics contend, it is the duty of those employees to identify their flaws, right? So it's the duty of the employees. That's the idea that follows, right? Duty of the employees, right? So employees fall behind, and so it's the duty of the employees to help identify their flaws and address them somehow, right? Okay, so A says popular career path. Well, how would that talk about employees and their shortcomings, them being responsible, them having the duty? Employees and duties should lean heavily on their employers. No, they should be the ones doing it. Must be in charge of their own careers. Yeah, that makes sense. Because, yeah, so it's the duty of them to do that. So this one is okay. We'll be ready for changes. And, well, we don't talk about changes in the job market. So C is the right answer. Okay, 16. Okay, so the sentence, okay, so you need to identify that it's a sentence structure question, okay? It's a sentence structure question. And what is this? What is this? What is if?
Conditional.
No, there is no such, we never talked about anything like that. I don't care if it's a conditional or not. Okay, the fact that you said that is, you're looking at this question wrong. Well, what kind of question is this? What kind of question is this?
The sentence structure.
Sentence structure. Then what are you looking for in a sentence structure question?
Subject, conjunction.
What?
Subject, conjunction, and verb.
Yes. Subject, verb, and conjunction. What is this? What's if? Huh? Yes, subordinating conjunction. Employees find themselves, right? Okay, and then we have a comma, right? Okay, and then we have these critics contend. Okay, I guess this is the subject and the verb. Okay, well, let's take a, well, if you take a look here though, it's, they want to actually, you know, some of the answer choices, they want to actually make this into one sentence, like this whole bit, right? Like up to like here. So you need to take account of what happens after this also. So let's take a look here. Then it is, okay, so we have a subject and a verb. Okay, so now we have a problem. Why? Because we have three clauses, right? We have three clauses, and what is this? I have a subordinating conjunction, subject, verb, and then like this, right? So this should be what's happening, right? Then what's a way to make this happen? Well, okay, if I make this thing into in a positive, right? Or actually like an inverted sentence, like somehow change the placement, then it will work. If I put like a comma here, then it would work, right? That's why it's D. Why? Because if I say these critics critics contend, comma, like this, it's saying, you know, this it's just changing the placement. These critics contend that if employees find themselves, and it goes on like this, right? If I say, okay, I won't say. I want to stop sounding negative. Jason, I think, is smart. So what's the original form of this sentence? It's I think Jason is smart, right? I think that Jason is smart. So same for this. These critics contend. Like if it's what they're saying. Like this whole statement is what they're saying, right? These critics contend that if employees find themselves falling behind in the workplace, then it is the blah, 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 right? So D is the right answer. That's the only way to make this happen. Other ones, I don't have any conjunctions, right? Another?
22.
Okay, well, for this one, you need to look at the picture, right? So, okay. Okay, which one did you choose? Which one did you choose? C is the right answer.
I said 22.
Okay, sorry. Which one did you choose for 22?
No, I chose A.
If you say A, then you're saying this whole bit is modifying something. What is this modifying?
Employers can also identify.
No, it can't. That doesn't make any sense. And why would you modify a group of people with which? Okay. So you need to just try all the other answer choices. So identify. If you say identify, you need an object, right? It's a transitive verb, right? If you say I identify, does that make any sense? No. Employers can also identify what? Identify what? You need something. You need an object, right? So C, right? So this whole bit, they need to identify this, right? So you don't use any comma. Okay, next passage, passage 3. Okay, so let's take a look. So you chose D. So I was just looking at this and thinking about why you chose D. It distracts. Okay, so yeah, it's right that it distracts. So this is fine. Okay, so but what about this part? From the paragraph's emphasis on the slow food movement's origins and beliefs. Okay, so let's check if we have this. Let's check if we have this. Okay, So it says McDonald's caused a stir, right? McDonald's caused a stir. On-the-go eaters were thrilled. So it's talking about McDonald's, right? And then McDonald's rising kind of thing. Prize regional foods. Young on-the-go eaters were thrilled. Those who prize regional foods and Italy's blah, 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 built on cooking and meals, feared, right? They feared that the restaurant signaled the death of a way to life. To counter this, right, a cohort of chefs, journalists, and sociologists spearheaded a slow food movement. Yeah, so it's right. It's right that they're talking about the origins, okay? So this one I think is okay. So let's take a look at this sentence. The group's philosophy was connected to the tale of the hare and the tortoise, in which they wins the race. Okay, well, okay, you got the fact that it's an irrelevant fact, right? But you should actually did you actually consider C? Why did you not choose C then?
I was debating between it. I just thought D was more convincing. I don't know why.
Okay. You also need to take a look at the next part. Okay. If you look at the next part, it's so it's talking about the movement. From its beginning, they opposed the standardization of taste that fast food chains promoted. So, yeah. I mean, why? I mean, it's better to say that we don't need to introduce that new idea because I mean, why bother mentioning that? And the focus on this paragraph is not their beliefs. If this is it. I mean, I guess you were kind of confused because they did mention this, but you can't really say that that's the paragraph's main focus. The paragraph's focus is on the origins, not necessarily the beliefs. Although it did mention that a little bit, but why bother mentioning this tale, right? Their philosophy. Why bother mentioning that when you're never going to be talking about that again? Because this passage is itself, it's talking about, what happens and that kind of thing. It's not necessarily about their beliefs. Okay, next question. Okay, what about the last passage then? 33? Okay. So I need to take a look at these two sentences. Okay, so starting from here. Members assert that food should be flavorful, carrying the properties of a particular region. It should be raised using environmentally sustainable practices. Okay, so it's what they believe, that preserve biodiversity. It should be accessible to all without exploiting the laborers. Right, okay, so this is what they believe. The slow food movement members believe this, and this, right? And then, what does it talk about here? Short Food runs programs that support small-scale producers. Okay, so it's talking about the programs. So what do they believe? That's the first thing that we talked about. And then we talked about, I don't know, like a few things. And then we talk about the programs. Okay, So I would say, okay, so they believe in this, so they do this. So they do these programs. That cause and effect is okay. Continuation, they believe in this and they do these. That's also okay, but I know it's not a contrast, right? So I'm going to get rid of B, and also I'm going to get rid of A while I'm at it. Why A? Because it's not repeating information. If you say in short, you need to kind of summarize what's happened before and kind of rephrase that, but that's not happening here. And also this. So now I'm down to these ends and by the same token. What does to these ends mean? It means ends here would mean goal, meaning in order to meet these goals, they're doing this, right? So in order to meet these goals, yeah, it's what they believe in. In order to meet these goals, they run these programs in order to get to this. So that's okay. But if I say by the same token, well, no, it's saying the two are parallel ideas. And it's not necessarily parallel ideas. It's about their beliefs and goals, and then the programs, the practical ones. So not necessarily this. So it should be C. Okay, so in the last passage then. Okay. Guys, when you, seriously though, you need to mark questions that you're not 100% sure of. You seriously need to do that. And for transition questions, you seriously need to take care of the key phrases. And for sentence structure questions, you need to identify the subject, verb, and conjunction. If you say that takes too much time, then you're saying, I don't want to look at the question properly. I just want to glance over it. That's what you're saying. I mean, how long does it take to circle certain words? It just means you don't want to look at the sentences carefully. I just want to do it quickly without thinking about that. I just want to go by feel. Use intuition. No, don't do that. Okay? So do it. Okay? Okay, let's take a break and then we'll come back to the reading passage. we didn't get to go over this. Passage set 9. What page is this? 95? 195. Okay. Okay. What? So these passages they appear pretty often. It's well, not that often, but it's you can't count on it to be on the test, but they appear pretty often. It's talking about a particular species and how it works, kind of thing. Okay, so the Venus flytrap. Okay, so we'll just say V needs to know when an ideal meal is crawling across its leaves. Okay, so they need to know this. Okay, so this is, I guess, important, right? Closing its trap requires a huge expense of energy, so they need a lot of energy, and reopening the trap can take several hours. So, okay, so this is a cause and effect, right? So it takes a lot of energy, and it can take a lot of time, right? So time and energy, it takes up much of it. So D only wants the spring closed when it's sure that the dawdling insect visiting its surface is large enough to be worth its time. Okay, so they need to know that, right? So it elaborates on this first sentence. This bit, starting from here to here, elaborates on this sentence, right? So they need to know when an ideal meal is coming. Ideal meal would probably be this, right? If they need to know if it's worth it, if it's worth spending that much energy and time into it, right? Okay, so that's our first idea. The large black hairs on their lobes allow the Venus flytraps to literally feel their prey, and they act as triggers. Okay, so the black hairs, they are triggers, right? So this is the definition of the LBH, right? The large black hairs that spring the trap closed when the proper prey makes its way across its trap. If the insect touches just one hair, the trap will not spring shut. Okay, so it's a conditional, so you can take care of this, right? If it's just one hair, it will not close. But a large enough bug will likely touch two hairs, right? About 20 seconds, and that signal springs the Venus flytrap into action. So that would make it close, right? So now you know, right? So it takes up a lot of time and energy for it to close. So it needs to know that it's worth it, right? If the insect is worth it. And how they figure that out is using their large black hairs. And they kind of explain the mechanism. If you touch just one hair, if the insect touches just one hair, it's not going to close. But if it touches two hairs within a time frame, it will close, right? So that you need to understand. I don't know where this passage is going yet. So right now you're just taking in information. You're just like, okay, so it's just explaining the mechanism, how it works, right? So basically this is how it works. Like a glimpse of that. And then it says, we can look at the system as analogous to short-term memory. Okay, so again, this is using kind of an analogy, right? It's using an analogy saying, okay, it's similar to short-term memory. First, the flytrap encodes the information, forms the memory, right? So it's using the analogy, like it's talking about the equivalent idea here, like this is what it would be to short-term memory, right? Forms the memory. That's something, it doesn't know what, has touched one of its hairs. Then it stores this information for a number of seconds. That's retaining the memory. So it's an extended analogy, right? And finally retrieves this information, recalling it, once the second hair is touched. Okay, so again, no new information here. It's just used an analogy. That's what it is, right? If a small ant takes a while to get from one hair to the next, the trap will have forgotten the first touch by the time ant brushes up against the next hair. Okay, right? So I'm still just taking this in. So in this passage, like, since you don't have a point of reference, you don't have like a rope to hold on to. You can't just skim through. You can't do that here. Why? Because I don't know what the passage is going to be about exactly, right? Like, you know, if we were reading that house cat passage, the wildcat versus house cat thing, then you know that it's about genetics, right? Then in that case you can go down. But here, you just need to kind of go through it, right? You need to understand the material here. In other words, okay, so this is good. It loses the storage of the information, doesn't close, and the ant happily meanders on. How does the plant encode and store the information from the unassuming bugs encounter with the first hair? Okay, so here's our question now, right? How does it encode the information, right? Yeah, that's something that I'm curious about too. It doesn't have a brain, right? How does it remember the first touch in order to react upon the second, right? Okay, yeah, because like I guess the hairs like this, like they have two hairs. If the insect is large enough, it's going to hit the second hair within a short amount of time. But if it's small, it's going to hit this, but it won't come to this one, the next one, within 20 seconds. So it wouldn't close, right? So that's the mechanism that you need to understand. And in order for you to understand the question, you need to understand this. That's why the author bothered mentioning this in the first place. So if you don't understand this, you can't understand the question. You wouldn't know what the passage is talking about, okay? So you need to understand that. Right? Okay, so the question is how do we encode? How does the plant encode? And how does it remember the first touch, right? Because it's going to forget after 20 seconds, right? Okay, so now that we have our question, right? How does D store info, right? Scientists have been puzzled by these questions ever since JBS's early report. Okay, so JBS. So what does his early report say? That's something that I want to find out. So from here on, it can be like a traditional study, like a new development kind of thing, right? But it's kind of talking about the history, right? So it's not, we don't necessarily have a new development yet, right? We're starting from the top, right? Like this is the first guy, right? This is the first guy who did the study because, scientists have been puzzled since this guy, right? So this is the first guy that we have, JBS. And then a century later, DH and AS. Okay, so these are the next people for our purposes, right? I don't know if there were any in between, but for the passage, these two people are the second generation, right? Proposed that fly trap stored information regarding how many hairs have been touched in the electric charge. Okay, so this is our initial answer, right? So how does it store info? Well, it's electric charge, right? So this is the initial answer, right? Okay, so it's in the electric charge. And then their model is quite elegant in its simplicity. Okay, so we're probably going to be talking about their model, their explanation, right? So how does this happen? Well, what do you mean exactly electric charge? How do they store this electric charge and so on? So now you're going to read about that. Okay, so it says, in their studies, they discovered that touching a trigger hair on the Venus flytrap causes an electric action potential. Okay, so electric action potential. And it's a cause and effect, right? So if you touch a trigger hair, right? So touch hair, that's going to cause an electric action potential. A temporary reversal in the blah, blah, blah. Okay, so you have a definition for the electric action potential. You don't necessarily need to know this, right? You can just mark this and just move on, right? That causes also, right? So again, we have a cause and effect. Induces the calcium channels to open. So we've seen chains like this before. Remember that, right? Like we've seen this in history passage also where we talk about chains, right? So calcium channels open. And then open in the trap. Okay, so let's go to the next part. I'm not reading information in the parentheses. Okay, thus causing a rapid increase in the concentration of calcium ions. So calcium ions increase. Okay, so this is the chain, right? So you touch the hair, there's going to be electric action potential, channels are going to open up, and then C is going to increase, right? So you should get this. This is how this electric charge thing works. This is the explanation for that, right? Okay. And then it says, they propose that the trap requires a relatively high concentration. So this is a requirement, right? So you need a lot of calcium. So relatively high, I don't know how much, they didn't give us a quantity or anything, but you need a lot of this in order to close, and that a single action potential from just one trigger hair being touched does not reach this level. Okay, so if the calcium levels are high enough, then it will close, right? That's what's happening. But if it's not high enough, it won't close, right? Therefore, a second hair needs to be stimulated to push the calcium concentration over this threshold and spring the trap, right? Okay, so one hair is not necessary. So this would be the threshold, right? You need to reach the. So in terms of this is going to be time, and this is going to be the calcium level, right? So if you touch one hair, it's going to increase. But if you don't reach this threshold, it won't close. So it wouldn't close unless you touch another hair. And in that case, it would go over the threshold, and then it would close, right? That's what it's saying, right? The encoding of the information requires maintaining a high enough level of calcium so that a second increase pushes the total concentration of calcium over the threshold. As the calcium ion concentrations dissipate meaning what? Huh? Yeah. Or decrease here. Dissipate over time. So it's going to. So I would kind of modify this. It's going to constantly go down from here, right? So if you get within a 20-second time frame, you get another touch, then it goes up, right? So it's going to look something like that. The final concentration after the second trigger won't be high enough to close the trap, right? So if the time is too much, it still won't go over here, right? That's what happens. Okay, so that's the chain you need to understand, right? So this you need to understand, right? So this is the mechanism in which the second generation people propose this, right? It's not JBS, it's the second generation, right? Okay, so let's take a look at the next paragraph. It says subsequent research. Okay, so now we're moving on to number 3, right? So it's not that AES guy, it's new people, right? Supports this model. Okay, so number 3 is going to support number 2. So AV, right? AV and his colleagues demonstrated that it is indeed electricity. Okay, good, right? So they said it's not wrong, right? They didn't like reverse what number 2 was saying or anything. That causes the Venus flytrap to close. To test the model, they rigged up. Okay, so now we're starting the process, right? So they actually did an experiment here, right? Electrodes and applied an electric current and blah, 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 right? So it's an experiment. When they modified this experiment by altering the amount of electric current, V could determine the exact electric charge, right? So they could determine this as long as 14 microcoulombs. So this is the result, right? So their result is if you get up to 14 microcoulombs, if you apply that much electricity, then the trap is going to close, right? So this is I guess the threshold for the electrical charge, right? This could come as one large burst or as a series of smaller charges. Okay, if it took longer than 20 seconds to accumulate the total change, the trap would remain open. Okay, that's it. Okay, so it's pretty simple, right? So this was number 2, and then AV had another study, right? This guy, he said. He actually measured, right? He performed an experiment, and it came down to 14. How do you write microcoulombs? Is it MC? Yeah, I don't know, right? I forgot everything. when it comes to like science stuff. Anyway, so this is what they came down to, right? So that's it, right? That's the passage. Okay, so let's take a look at 42. Primary purpose of the passage. Okay, so primary purpose, we did discuss some studies. We did have one experiment, right? Okay, so let's take a look. A says discuss findings. That's okay. Present research. That's okay. Identify the process. Possibly. Okay, so I'll let that go also. Provide a brief overview. That works also. Okay, so I mean, I don't know. I would need to read the second part, right? I would need to go into detail. Discuss findings that offer a scientific explanation. Yes. For the Venus flytrap's closing action. Yeah, what was the scientific explanation? This. And then they even gave it a number. So this one is okay. Suggests that the Venus flytrap's predatory behavior is both complex and unique. Well, for all we know, almost every plant could be doing this. We don't know if this is unique, right? So I don't know. So what about C? By which the Venus flytrap's closing action has evolved. We never talked about any kind of change. So that's why C is not the answer. They provide a brief overview of the Venus flytrap and its predatory behavior. This one is okay, but you need to think about this. This passage was actually reporting on stuff. It's not actually explaining it himself, right? He used other studies. That was the main thing, right? In order, to scientifically explain the mechanism, he referred to the second study. And of course the third, right? So B would be better here. Not B, but A, right? A, right? Yeah. We crossed out B. 43, based on the passage, significant advantage of the Venus flytrap's requirements for multiple triggers is, and then we have a line reference question, right? So so I'm just gonna do this, right? It's good if you can just pre-phrase the answer right in your head after reading this. But if you can't, what you can do is, okay, so what's the advantage of the requirement, right? We did talk about a lot of requirements. We marked a lot of requirements, right? What was the requirement? The insect needed to be big enough, and it needed to touch 2 hairs within 20 seconds. That was the requirement, right? So you can go to the line reference and you can check for this. And I can remember the requirements being in the first paragraph, right? So I would need to, I'm just going to, you can go in order, right? So starting from line 3 to 7, let's take a look, 3 to 7. So it says, requires a huge expensive energy, blah, blah, blah. So it only wants to spring clothes when it's sure that the dawdling insect is large enough to be worth, right? So yeah, they can determine if it's worth or not, right? If it's not worth, they're not going to close, and they will thus save time and energy. So this could be an advantage, right? So I'm just going to leave A, say this is okay, right? So in this case, we would save time and energy. What about 7-Eleven? Large black hairs allow them to feel, and they act as triggers. Okay, this is about the mechanism. It's about how they work, so I wouldn't know an advantage based on this. And after this, it just goes on to talk about the mechanism even further, so I don't want to look at C and D. I can just pick A here, right? So with that, I'm just going to say, okay, they can save time and energy. Save time and energy. So who chose A here? 43, who chose A? Okay, good. So some people choose A, thinking the plant can identify the species. No, well, they can't really tell if it's your finger or an insect either, right? They just feel the black hairs. They just feel it, and then if it's triggered, it will just close, right? So it's not this identify the species. It's conserve the plant's calcium reserves. Who chose B? Yeah. So if you chose B, you thought about it too much. And did you choose A for 44? Okay. So that's that thing we talked about. Okay. in order for you to choose B, calcium reserves needs to be in lines 3 to 7, right? But we're not talking about calcium reserves at all here, right? So when you're doing line references, the answer needs to be directly in the line reference itself. So B is not the answer. This is not in line 3 to 7, right? So safeguards a plant's energy supply. This is possible, right? Because we said save energy, time and energy. So this one is okay. What about D? Prevents the plant from closing before capturing. Well, it's not, our concern is just the insect size. It's not about whether we capture it or not, right? So this is just irrelevant. So C is the right answer. So why does he use this word? Okay, so who chose A here? 45. Who chose B? Who chose C? D? Yeah. Okay, so it's not melodramatic. Is it sad? What does melodramatic mean? You guys know what a melodrama is? What's a melodrama? Huh? I can't hear you. What? About love? No. Well, at least originally melodrama. Why, do you know why it's named melodrama? Because, okay, mellow means like mellow as in melody, right? Music. So drama accompanying music, right? That's what it was originally, right? You know, if you have music accompanying drama, it's forcing an emotion on you, right? That's originally that's what it was, but you know, nowadays if you say melodramatic, it means you know, it's just kind of sad, it's mellow, that kind of thing, right? Anyway, is this dramatic? Why is this dramatic? Do you feel sad for the insect? No. Okay, so this is something that we talked about, right? So in a science passage, especially towards the beginning of a science passage, they're going to use informal language to suck you in, right? Because they know, even the writers know, that the passage itself is very boring, right? We talked about this before, right? The two most common ones, the two most common purposes for science passages, casual language, and what? The tentative tone, right? You guys remember us talking about that? What's the author's purpose in using like could, might, and speculate, you know, these kinds of words, right? Why would they use that? Because it's saying they're not entirely sure about that. It's showing that tentative tone. What about in this case? Well, it's talking about that casual tone, right? 46, discussion of short-term memory. Okay, so why do we use that analogy? Okay, so same, right? In science passages, all the analogies are going to be there in order to make you better understand this topic, right? Since we're not so familiar with the very advanced sciences, they want to give us like a reference point. Oh, it's like a ping pong ball. You're trying to put a ping pong ball into water, right? Do you feel that resistance? Yeah, that's what it's like. That's what the Higgs field is like, right? So something like that. So it's this, clarify and explanation, right? According to the passage, which statement best explains why the Venus flytrap requires a second trigger hair to be touched within a short amount of time in order for its trap to close? Okay, so in order for you to solve this, you need to understand that mechanism completely, right? So it's this. Well, first of all, it's this thing, right? If you touch the hair, EAP is going to open up the calcium channels, and then the calcium level is going to go up. But you also needed to understand that point, right? There is a threshold, There's a threshold. So if the calcium level is below this, it's not going to close. The trap's not going to close. And it's going to dissipate over time. So you need a second touch to make it go over this threshold, right? So we read about that, right? So you need to remember that. Okay, so A says second trigger produces an electric charge that reverses. No, it doesn't reverse. It supplements it. It adds on to it, right? B, second trigger stabilizes. No, it doesn't stabilize anything. Stabilizes the surge. What does surge mean? Surge means sudden increase, okay? So if it stabilizes the surge, it's like, okay, it's going up, hey, why don't we stabilize this, right? No, it's not necessarily going down, but it can make it stabilize like this. No, it doesn't do that. It does quite the opposite, right? So not B. What about C? The second trigger prompts the calcium channels to open. Well, no, it's not necessarily the second trigger, right? The second it's talking about why it closes, but this would be an incomplete answer, right? And the first time never mind. Okay, D. Second trigger provides a necessary supplement. Yeah, that's it, right? In order for us to reach the threshold, we need to touch it twice. So D is the right answer. 48, which choice describes a scenario in which H and S's model predicts that a Venus flytrap will not close around an insect? Okay, so when will it not close? Okay, so we're still talking about this model, right? When will it not close? Okay, so the only scenario in which it would close is a large enough insect touches both hairs at the same time, or two hairs are touched within 20 seconds, right? Those are the scenarios in which it would close, okay? And since it's talking about calcium ion concentrations, we also need to think about that threshold. The calcium ions need to go over that threshold in order for it to close. So A says large insect second contact with the plant's trigger hair results in a total calcium ion concentration above. Okay, so this will close. Obviously it will close. So not this. B, large insect makes contact with the second trigger hair after a period of inactivity. Okay, after a period of inactivity, okay, and so during which calcium ion concentrations have diminished appreciably, right? Well, then in that case, there's a possibility that it won't, right? Because it went up and then it dissipated considerably. And even if we have another one, we might not be able to reach this threshold. So this one might not close, right? I want to check the others though. Large insects contact with the plant's trigger hairs cause calcium channels to open in the trap. I'm not entirely sure about this. It said a large insect, but this may or may not open. I'm not entirely sure. D. Large insects contact with the second trigger hair occurs within 10 seconds. That's fine. If it happens within 20 seconds, it will close. So now it's between B and C. But I mean, this one is way too vague. We don't have enough information. But this one has this information, diminished appreciably. Then it's more likely that B is going to be the one not closing. So B is the right answer. Okay, demonstrated would be established, right? Establish is a word that you need to know in science. If you establish something in science, it means you proved it, right? Based on the passage, what potential criticism might be made of? Okay, so these are one of the harder questions. Okay, we've done this before. Do you remember this with the fishing rod experiments? Right, this guy. It was about whether the presence of audience is going to hamper the performance, or if it's going to increase the performance. I mean, is it not going to have an effect on the performance, right? And then what did we do? Like he got a bunch of kids, and then he gave them fishing rods, and then said, "Hey, try winding it or whatever." And then kids did better when other people were watching them, right? What was a potential criticism of that? It wasn't stated in the passage, but a potential criticism in that passage was what? Some kids might be better fishers. I mean, they might have had experiences with fishing rods. So what does the passage say there? The passage said nobody had experience with fishing rods, even before someone asked, right? So it's something like that, right? Potential criticism. Okay, so I don't know because I didn't read. I didn't read this guy, right? I didn't read the process for the third one. So what am I going to do? So I have a line reference here. So you can take a look at the line references one by one, and you can think about the potential criticisms that can occur here. So let's go to 66 to 69. 66 to 69 demonstrated that it is indeed electricity. Okay, well, how can you criticize this? They didn't even say anything yet, right? Well, I can't think of any potential criticism. I mean, this is just stating their results. How are you going to criticize this? So this you need to eliminate. What's the next one? What's the next line?
6971.
6971. To test the model, they rigged up very fine electrodes and applied an electrical current. Okay, that sounds fine, right? I mean, you apply electrical current, right? Electrical current, and then I don't know, potentially it's okay, right? But just in case, you can take a note right next to B. Right next to B, you can write something like, okay, I mean, you don't know what the question is asking just yet. You're just looking at the line references. So you should say something like, okay, they applied electrical current. So A, I know, is not the answer, but B, this is electric current. What about the next one? What's the next line?
7174.
This made the trap close without any direct touch to its trigger hairs. Wait, doesn't the wording sound a little bit like, you know, this wording, doesn't it stick out? Like they left out something. They left out something. What does it say? Any direct touch. So this is saying there was no direct touch. Huh. I mean, couldn't this be a potential criticism? You know what I'm saying, right? What if we say, hey, why would you just apply this? You didn't have any direct touch. That's not necessarily testing this then, right? Because this was an essential part, right? So where is this? That could be a potential criticism. What about the next line?
7477.
74. When they modified the experiment by altering the amount of electric current, they could determine the exact electrical charge. Okay, I don't know. I mean, I don't know, but you can just say modify. They modified experiment. Okay, so now you can go to the questions. Okay, let's take a look. A says V's understanding of H and S's model was incorrect. Well, it's not that you don't know about this. How in the world would you know they did not correctly understood this model? Like based on what? Based on what can you say that? If you stretch your reasoning, you could potentially pair A with C, I guess. Did anybody do that? A with C? Okay, good. Then let's take a look at B. V's measurements did not corroborate a central element of H&S's model. What would that central element be? Direct touch, right? So it should be B and C. Okay, 52, based on the passage and studying the Venus flytrap, V and his colleagues made the most extensive use of which type of evidence? Okay, so, well, we know that they, now that we read their process, what did they do? They hooked up electrical things, and then they applied electricity, and they measured, what's the amount of electricity needed for it to close, and then they determined that it's 14 microcoulombs. Okay, so A says mathematical models. No, they tested it, right? It was a hands-on experiment. Analysis of data. I want to say analysis of data. Well, and of course, not data collected from previous researchers. It's something that they did in person. So C, information obtained from monitoring the Venus flytraps response. Yes, this is what they did, right? To varying amounts of electrical current. Yeah, they did that. And then they came to the conclusion that it was 14 microcoulombs. So C is the right answer. Okay, let's take a look at the passage right after that. This one. Okay, so you could potentially waste a lot of time here reading about what? Reading about the history, reading about what was in the history books, right? Oh, you know, like what was it? Like, you know, these parts. You should be skipping these parts. Why should you be skipping these parts? Why? Because it's not plot, it's not characterization. Why are you reading this? You know what I mean? Okay, so the plot is what? This guy went into a restaurant and then he's reading a book, right? That's it. And then there were some people coming in. That was the plot, right? Characterization? Well, a little bit. Towards the end, we see a lot of characterization for this person at the very end, Mr. Peters, right? So let's take a look starting from here, okay? So he was reading this book and then like a group of people came in and then, you know, like he was kind of distracted by them. That was it pretty much, okay? What about here? But before L got halfway through them, a coat that he recognized as his father was hung on the hook next to his chair. Okay, so did his father sit next to him? Just based on what we've read, did his father sit next to him? Who says yes? Well, the answer is, the correct answer is, I don't know. Maybe it's his brother wearing his father's coat. You never know. The only thing, okay, you shouldn't read literature like you're reading literature in school. We need to take everything at face value, right? So his father's coat was there, but how do you know if it's his father? It didn't say that. You know what I mean? Okay? Unless you're directly asked about it and you need to, it's a most strongly suggest question that forces you to do that, you don't want to be doing that. You don't want to make any assumptions. Maybe it's his uncle wearing his father's coat because his father's dead. You don't know, right? Okay. So L closed the book and said, I didn't think you were coming. So something that happened for sure is somebody joined him at the table. That's for sure, though, right? Okay, so let's take a look at the next part. And then it says, time is probably no more unkind to sporting characters than it is to other people, but physical decay unsustained by respectability is somehow more noticeable. So do you think he said this without any reason? This is probably talking about Mr. Peters, right? I mean, this person, he was probably not respected. That's what it's suggesting. This you can do. Because it's just a general statement after mentioning the fact that another person joined him at the table, right? And it says, Mr. Peters' hair was turning gray. So you're talking about this guy and his physical decay here, right? Okay, so, and his scalp showed through on top. Okay, here. These are all characterizations. Right? So what's the characterization? He was getting old, physical decay. That was Mr. Peters' characterization. He had lost weight also. This, okay? What does this mean? Like some people look at this and say, oh, you know, it's good. Say he lost weight, good. No. Why did he lose weight? Yeah, he's becoming old. That's how you should take this in. Don't make any assumptions, right? He no longer filled out his clothes the way he used to. His collar was poor and the flower had disappeared from his buttonhole. In its place was an American Legion button. So this whole thing, right? So this whole thing is just supporting physical decay, right? So you should say, okay, so this whole thing is a characterization of Mr. Peters and his physical decay, right? That should be how you read this, okay? So, and then next part, and then it says, apparently he himself was not aware that there had been any change. Okay, so this is his next characterization, right? Not aware that there had been any change, okay? So although he did grow old, characterization 2 is he not aware of physical change, right? He straightened his tie self-consciously, and when Irma handed him a menu, he gestured with it so that the two women at the next table would notice the diamond ring on the fourth finger of his right hand. Why did he do this? Why did he do this?
Remember that he's married.
No. So that's exactly what I don't want you to do. Okay? You're making assumptions. You know what I mean? That's exactly what you do not want to do. What should you do? So why okay, so someone tell me, why did he show her the diamond ring? 은지, why did he show her the diamond ring? What do we have? What do we have? Guys, what do we have? What do we have? What do we have? Guys, what do we have? It's not a trick question. What do we have?
Not aware of physical change.
Not aware of physical change. That's why. Okay? He thinks he's young. Okay? He thinks he's young. Both of these things, and also the fact that his hand showed signs of the manicurist, one can blame on the young man. Okay, so now it says something else. Okay? So these things, right? So these things you can blame on the young man. So now we have another character, right? Now we have another character, right? The young man. Okay? So who is this young man? Who is this young man? He had his picture taken with the derby hat on the back of his head. Okay, so I guess he was in a picture, right? Okay, he was in a picture, number one. And also sitting with the girl in the curve of the moon. Okay, well, whatever, right? So he had his picture taken and then this. The young man had never for 1 second deserted Mr. Peters. Okay. He was always there tugging at Mr. Peters' elbow, making him do things that were not becoming in a man of 45. Okay? So, this person, right? So this is Mr. Peters, right? This is Mr. Peters. And then there was this young man. This guy was always next to this person, right? Always. Even in the bathroom, right? Always next to him. What did he do? Make him do things that were not fitting in a man of 45. Hey, act like a 20-year-old. Hey, act like a 20-year-old, right? Can you take that at face value now? Now you can't. That's ridiculous. Is this a science fiction story? This guy never for 1 second deserting Mr. P. Always there? This guy always being there? You know what I mean? Is that even possible? Always there? Even when he's sleeping? Hey, act like a 20-year-old. Hey, act like a 20-year-old. Always? Is that possible? No. So who is this? It's him. It's his younger self, right? It's his younger self. His younger self is telling him, hey, act young, kind of thing, right? So he's acting like this, right? Yeah, so here it's now, I mean, when you're forced to answer this, it's because he saw his father's jacket. The answer is he saw his father's jacket, right? What could that possibly mean? His father had joined him at the table. So initially you should be like, okay, I'm not sure if it's his father. I'm not sure. People at the other table were, no, this was something that was done before. This caused them to read the same part again. That's what happened, right? So we're done with this part. He has finished a chapter about the Congress. No, it's not because, I mean, he was still reading when he saw his father's coat. He's preparing to leave. No. So he saw his father's coat. So only possible one is, okay, now I'll say it's his father. If I'm forced to say it, I will say it, right? Primary impression. Okay, so of course this is going to be D, right? Because physical decay is his characterization. Last paragraph. Okay, so last paragraph was that, you know, that young man, right? That young man never deserting him, always forcing him to act like not non-45-year-old. Is 45 old?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, by today's standards, isn't this passage describing him like a 60-year-old, right? No? I mean, you guys wouldn't know, right? Hair was turning gray and his scalp showed through on top. That doesn't sound like a 45-year-old. That sounds like a 55 or 60-year-old. No? Am I forcing you guys to say yes? Okay, let me ask you. How old do I look? Okay, let's do this. How old do you think I am? How old do I look? Korean age. How old do you think I am? Korean age.
Above 40.
Above 40. Okay. What about you?
36.
36. Okay. What about you? 33. Wait. 30. Huh?
30 as well.
30 what?
30.
30. Okay. 30. Huh? 34.
35.
35.
34.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So, good luck on the test. I'm going. I'm leaving now. Especially you. Like, what? You don't. What is wrong with you? What do you mean? Have you ever seen a person above 40?
Yes.
Okay. How old? Who takes math here? Okay. 정록쌤. How old does 정록쌤 look?
Between 33 and 36.
Okay. How old does he look?
27, 28, 27, 25.
Hmm? Who else takes math? Okay. How old?
30.
28. How old did you say I am?
33.
Erica. How old does she look?
About 27 to 30.
Okay, you lost all credibility. Like, okay. 지연 쌤, how? Ginny, how old?
25.
Oh, so Erica's older than Ginny? Okay. Yeah, this guy sucks, right? he just sucks, right? Okay, how old does Taejin Sim look?
Who's changing this?
The guy who checks your temperature. So he looks like 50? He looks 50?
Yeah.
You're crazy. Okay. Okay, fine. Fine, you guys. I forgot what I was talking about. That was traumatic. Did anybody choose I can't get over that. Wow. Over 40. Over 40? Why? Is it because I talked about Back to the Future? Okay. Okay, Unji, how old does Erica Sim look? 22. What about Ginny?
Same.
Same?
25.
25. What about Ginny?
26.
Okay. Okay. That. Okay, good then. Did anybody choose A for number 8? B. Who chose B? C? D? Okay, good. Yeah. Behaves as if he's a younger version himself. That's right. So this one is fitting, right? Wait, let me just tell you the answers for this passage though. Number 1, D, right? Number 2, C. This one is C, number 3. Number 4, A. Number 5, C. Wait. Number 6, A, we did. 7, D, we did. This one, B, we did. And then, it's this one. It's this one, right? Which choice best supports the conclusion that he wants to attract attention? Okay, so that's an idea that we haven't talked about, right? So you should be pretty surprised when you see this. He wants to attract attention, okay? So, how should you go about this? Well, you need to look at it one by one, right? Okay, so you would have this in mind and then go to the answer choices. So, line 80, he was not aware. Okay, well, I can't say anything about this, right? Because this is just saying like he wasn't aware that he got old, right? So that one's done. What about B? What's the line number for B? 8185. He straightened his tie self-consciously, and when Irma handed him a menu, he gestured with it so that the two women at the blah 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 would notice the diamond ring on the fourth finger of his right hand. Okay, so I can say that's to attract attention. So only when you're asked specifically to make an assumption, you can do it. Okay, but when you're reading the passage, you shouldn't. Okay, so this one, it could be, possibly, but I want to look at other ones also. What about C? 90, 91. Well, no, this is talking about the young man, right? And then the next one's after that, right? Okay, so not that one, right? So B. Okay. This passage was pretty difficult, no? Was it? Was it okay? We are not witnessing. What about this one? Building good transit. Okay. Why don't you guys go to that passage? Building good transit. Okay. And number 11. Number 11 for building good transit. So why don't you guys close your eyes? Okay. Who chose A, B, C, D? Sorry, one more time. A, B, C, D. Okay, good. So yeah, a lot of you got this wrong. So that means when you were reading the passage, you weren't necessarily looking for relationships in between sentences. You were just taking in information. If you're just taking in information blindly, then it can potentially mean, it could potentially get you the main purpose question wrong. Okay? So I'm just going to take a look at the very beginning, okay? So because this passage, you need to be really careful in the very beginning. So this is one of those opinionated social science passages. So it has an opinion. So you can spend a little bit more time if you recognize that the second passage has a point, right? If it has a point, yeah, it's a little bit harder than usual, okay? When they do have a point, when social science passages have a point, they're talking about, they have a really minor point of view, meaning they go against conventional views, right? If they're talking about organic crops, I talked about this example, right? If they're talking about organic crops versus conventional crops, usually people would say, hey, organic crops are better, right? That's the mainstream idea. But a social science passage would say, no, that's not the case. Actually, they're the same. Or conventional crops are better, right? Surprise, right? You were wrong, kind of passage. That's usually what happens, okay? Here, it's the same, right? This passage was kind of surprising. It's talking about transit might be a bad idea, like, you know, but it can actually backfire. That's how it starts, right? You know? I mean, everybody would think that building good transit is a good idea, right? Okay, anyway, let's take a look. So how scientific innovation, increased efficiency, and good intentions can make our energy and climate problems worse. Okay, so that's kind of surprising, right? So making things better, scientific innovation, increased efficiency, and good intentions, they can backfire and make it worse. That's the title, okay? So you can kind of sense that there's an opinion coming here, right? It's not just facts. It's not just explaining. It's not just reporting on a scientific study. It's arguing for something, right? Okay, so let's take a look. Building good transit isn't a bad idea, but it can actually backfire. Okay, so it's a conditional though. So let's be careful. If the new trains and buses merely clear space on highway lanes for those who would prefer to drive, right? Okay, so you know what is it? What does transit mean?
It's like going through something.
In this case, what would it mean? By the way, you shouldn't talk now. Huh? Yeah. Yeah.
The trains and buses, the transit.
Yeah. Yeah. Like 대중교통, right? So building good transit, it's not a bad idea, right? So it's good, but it can backfire, right? Why? Because you know a lot of people are gonna take transit if you build good transit, and the highways are gonna be empty. And then what's gonna happen? More people are gonna drive, right? And who are those? A group that historically has included almost everyone with access to a car. So what he's saying, what he's implying here is just that, you know, everyone prefers to drive, right? I mean, you know, this really doesn't apply to Korea. It's about the States. You know, like, you know, people who've been, you guys would know. You know, in the States, people want to drive. They don't want to take the bus. They don't want to take the subway, right? So it's talking about that, right? Okay. Anyway, to have environmental value, new transit has to replace, okay, so to do something, we have to do something. So it's talking about a requirement, right? So new transit has to replace and eliminate driving on a scale sufficient to cut energy consumption overall, right? So we need to make it big, we need to make that elimination large enough so that the energy consumption overall goes down, right? So that's the requirement. But what does it mean? Like you have no idea. Like I mean you can get a sense of what this means, but you don't necessarily know it, and that's explained here. If it says that means that, it's going to give you the significance of that, right? It's going to illustrate, I mean, it's going to tell you explicitly why that's important. That means that a new transit system has to be backed up by something that impels complementary reductions, okay? So we need complementary reductions. I don't know what these are exactly just yet, but he says, yeah, in order for that to work, we need to also reduce something else. What are the complementary reductions in car use, right? So how are you going to do that? So these are the examples, right? Physical elimination of traffic lanes or the conversion of existing roadways into bike or bus lanes, right? So just getting rid of the roads, literally, right? Ideally in combination with higher fuel taxes, parking fees, and tolls. Yeah. Okay? So just kind of discouraging driving, basically, right? So he's saying it needs to be this, right? That means that a new transit system has to be backed up by something. So he's saying we need to do this. Complementary reductions are necessary. So so far, this is his point, right? The bottom line that he got to is this. How do you know that? Because, you know, here we know that the part starting after this is going to be the significance, right? And we came down to this. And then he gave us examples, right? And then what does he say? Needless to say, those ideas are not popular, right? Okay, so these ideas are not popular, but they're necessary. Okay, repeating his point again, right? He's saying not popular, but they're necessary because, and then he states the reason why. So that's his point, elaborated here, right? So what's his point? His point is we need complementary reductions. That's his point. We need complementary reductions. That's his main point. That's the answer to number 11. We need complementary reductions. So you should have recognized that semi-prescription, right? He's saying it's necessary, and then, you know, this is a significant sentence, so you should have gotten stuck on this sentence, and then you recognizing that this is just all examples supporting that, and then he says they're necessary. This is just explaining why, right? So for number 11, let's say, what about A? Provide support for the claim that efforts to reduce traffic actually increase traffic. Well, this would be a rationale to support his point, right? But what's his point? You might be tricked into A. You might be tricked into A. He does say this, but he says this in order to say we need complementary reductions, right? It will increase traffic, so we need complementary reductions, right? It's one of the supporting points, right? This point is. What about B? Dispute the widely held belief that building and improving mass transit system is good for the environment. Well, he's not trying to dispute. He's just saying, what? We need complementary reductions. That's just it, right? The widely held belief is going to be something like this. And it's then in this case, if B were to be the answer, the passage would be, okay, here's the opponent's point of view, and this is what they think. But actually, I disagree. That's how it would go, But it's not that. He's just saying, hey, we need complementary reductions. I know they're not popular, but we need this. Negative consequences? No. We need. Argue that one way to reduce the negative environmental effects of traffic is to make driving less agreeable. This is complementary reductions. Rephrased. So that's why it's D. Okay, so good for you if you got that right, because a lot of people get that question wrong. And if you just get that part, that passage is pretty easy. Yes? Or am I making assumptions? Okay. Well, you guys know what suburban sprawl is? It's kind of a idea that occurs, comes up pretty often on the SAT, suburban sprawl. You guys heard about that? Suburban sprawl? No? No one's heard of suburban sprawl? So who's lived in the States before? Where'd you live? Maryland? Where'd you live? Huh? Where? Minnesota? Okay. So Minneapolis? Near Minneapolis, right? How far from Minneapolis? Huh? You don't know? Huh? Near? Like 20 or 30 minutes? So Maryland where? Like near DC?
1 hour from DC, 30 minutes from Baltimore.
Okay. Okay, so, people don't, usually people don't live in downtown, right? Okay, if people ask me, okay, where were you born, or where do you live? Where did you live? I say Chicago because people would not know. I'm actually from Glenview, Illinois. It's just a suburb, like 20 or 30 minutes away from Chicago. But no one knows if I say Glenview. So, everyone near Chicago says they're from Chicago. Suburbs around New York, people know a lot. So they say, oh, I'm from Brooklyn, or I'm from the Queens, or something like that. They will say that. But usually when it comes, like if you say Minnesota, yeah, where? Oh, near Minneapolis. That's usually what people ask you, or something like that. But no one lives in downtown except like a few cities, right? So usually how it is you have downtown, right? Downtown for Minnesota, it would be Minneapolis, right? If you go to Minneapolis, they're going to have all the companies there. They're going to have all the workplaces there, right? They're going to have a lot of restaurants there, right? So everything commercial is there, right? So what usually happens is people work there, okay? People work in downtown, right? But do they live in downtown? Well, for New York, it's kind of different. New York is kind of a different story. But for like most other cities, people don't live in downtown. Usually the people who live in downtown are usually towards the bottom of the socioeconomic hierarchy, right? A lot of so like last time I talked about Teach for America, right? Did I talk about Teach for America? Oh, okay, so there's something called Teach for America. Do you guys know what Teach for America is? So after you graduate from college, like young people, you can apply to this program called Teach for America. It's kind of like the Peace Corps. You guys know what the Peace Corps is? Okay, so, well, I won't talk about the Peace Corps, but Teach for America is like it's kind of like volunteer work, right? So you volunteer as a teacher. Why would you volunteer as a teacher? Because there's not enough teachers to teach in the inner city, in downtown. Why? Because teachers they don't want to go to the inner cities. It's in the schools are pretty quote unquote bad, and they're in rough neighborhoods, right? Because all the people who live here are pretty, come from pretty poor backgrounds, right? So these people volunteer and then they work in inner cities, right? Why did I say that? Just to illustrate that, you know, people don't really live here, right? People don't really live in downtown. They work somewhere else. So usually what they do is they just commute, right? They go to work. They just go to work here, and after like 5 p.m., everyone goes back home. So that's why like 5 p.m. or starting from like 4 p.m. you get traffic jams like all across the states. Yeah, you know, everybody's 퇴근, everybody's going home, right? They're taking the highway going home. Usually it takes like 20 to 30 minutes, right? So what's suburban sprawl? Yeah, this is mostly because people. Suburban sprawl is just these suburbs. So these are called suburbs. If you go to these suburbs, it's just it's just houses usually. Like you don't have much. You don't have like any companies there. It's usually just some restaurants and like grocery stores and just houses, right? You guys seen this in movies, right? Like you have a front yard and a backyard, and then you know like a house, like a medium-sized house. Those are the suburbs in the United States, right? So people live in the suburbs, right? And suburban sprawl is this the suburbs just spreading, right? It's going even further than this. So when you have a pretty big city, people are going to start off living like right next to it. And then if more people come here, like there's gonna appear more suburbs. It's gonna be more suburbs. And then it's just gonna go on and on and on. So in Korea, I mean, you can't necessarily say the same applies to Korea, but Korea kind of has that. Like Bundang or like Wire Shindoshi or like Dongtan, right? So those are like the Korean suburbs. So you can think of it that way, right? You guys know what I mean, right? So it's kind of like that. So, and it's usually used in a very negative connotation. Why? Because this is bad for the environment, right? So people move further away from the city, and they go back and forth every day using cars. Like usually it's just one person using one car, and they're in the car for like almost 2 hours. Like if they get caught in traffic. So that's a lot of gas they use, and carbon footprint and stuff like that. So that's what it's talking about. And if enough people show up and a new suburb shows up, then that itself is gonna use a lot of energy, that town and stuff like that. So it's talking about that. That's what this passage was discussing. So this passage kind of works under the premise that you already know that, right? Democratic inversion. It's talking about democratic inversion. Well, what does inversion mean? People moving back to the cities, right? So this was a nationwide phenomenon. The suburban sprawl was a nationwide phenomenon. Right after World War II, people started doing that. Like after World War II was when the first highways were showing up. So that's why people started moving away from the city and to like larger houses and stuff. You can have larger houses in suburbs and stuff. So that's why. But democratic inversion, that was talking about them coming back to the cities. It's happening in like Los Angeles and stuff right now. So I guess it's that. But if you don't know what that is, you're gonna have a little bit of a pretty difficult time understanding exactly what's going on here. So we'll go over this passage tomorrow. And for homework, why don't you guys do the next exercises, the next sets, okay? So 11 for writing, 11 for reading, and 13 for writing, yeah. Okay. If you have any questions, you can ask me right now, or you can go have lunch right now.